David Harris, a 19-year-old young man, stood before Judge Jackson at the Los Angeles court, accused of car theft and resisting arrest. These were serious charges, and the situation led many to believe he would be easily convicted. However, while everyone in the courtroom viewed him as just another typical criminal, David was far from being an ignorant or innocent young man, as they presumed. Faced with serious accusations, David felt no fear or discouragement. He stood firm, eyes forward, displaying a confidence that few in the room could recognize. Judge Jackson, with a stern expression, looked at David over his glasses, occasionally curling his lips into a mix of a smirk and a sneer. He believed David was just another mischievous teenager, a clueless criminal who had no understanding of what was happening. To him, this was just another ordinary trial, nothing special. Judge Jackson even mocked David by saying, "You think you're some kind of legal expert? This isn't a debate club, kid." Despite this, David didn't flinch. He didn't respond to the mockery, but continued to maintain a calm and collected demeanor. David had spent years preparing for this moment. While not a professional lawyer, he had extensively studied law and court procedures since he was young. His mother, Linda Harris, a paralegal with over 20 years of experience, shared many stories with him about how the legal system could sometimes be unjust, about the flaws in cases, the bias of judges, and even the lack of effort from some defense attorneys. These stories motivated David to learn the law and fight for justice, no matter the circumstances. He never anticipated standing in court as a defendant, but he had prepared himself well to confront this situation. As the trial proceeded, no one in the courtroom could have predicted what was coming next. Although David had been assigned a public defender, Lisa Thornton, who had barely spoken a word since entering the courtroom, David decided to represent himself. He calmly stood up and announced to Judge Jackson that he would defend himself. The courtroom fell silent, and no one could believe what they had just heard. Some even laughed, unable to understand David's decision. They thought he was just another reckless teenager with no legal knowledge, and that this decision would only make matters worse. Judge Jackson, with clear sarcasm in his gaze, looked down at David and asked again, "You're going to defend yourself?" His tone was filled with disbelief. People in the courtroom began to laugh softly, but David remained composed. He didn't respond to their mockery. What he knew for certain was that he had prepared for this moment. While his friends played games or engaged in sports, he spent his time studying the law, reviewing case studies, and practicing debates. David gave a slight smile and began stepping forward. He stood in the middle of the courtroom, undeterred by the prosecutor Mitchell Carrington's confident glare, a man accustomed to winning every trial. The curious gazes of the spectators didn't distract him. David focused on one thing only, revealing the truth. He looked at Judge Jackson and began his first question. "Your Honor, I would like to confirm something with the prosecutor." This wasn't just the first step in defending himself. It was a clear sign that he was not an ordinary defendant. David was preparing to fight for himself, not with emotion, but with sharp logic and the legal knowledge he had acquired over the years. As David began his defense, he didn't rush. Instead, he let the silence linger, allowing everyone to feel the seriousness of his approach. He continued with the first question, maintaining the tension in the room. "Your Honor, I would like to confirm one point with the prosecutor." The entire courtroom was shocked, all eyes focused on David. Prosecutor Mitchell Carrington, who had previously been confident, looked at him with annoyance and answered impatiently, "So, what do you want to ask?" David, undeterred, continued, "The prosecutor said Officer Daniel Ruiz saw me behind the wheel of the stolen car, but I have reason to doubt this. Your Honor, I request that we verify Officer Ruiz's GPS logs from that night when the incident occurred." A deep silence spread through the room. Judge Jackson raised an eyebrow, while Prosecutor Carrington began to show signs of discomfort. People began to realize that this wasn't just a typical defense from an inexperienced defendant. Why make this request? Prosecutor Carrington quickly retorted, "This is an official police report. It cannot be doubted." However, David remained firm. If Officer Ruiz was really there, the GPS data will prove it. If not, then his report cannot be considered reliable evidence. David's words made not only the prosecutor, but even Judge Jackson pause and think. The judge looked at David for a long moment, as if he was just realizing that this was not as simple as he initially thought. Prosecutor Carrington stammered for a while before attempting to regain his composure. "Your Honor, Officer Ruiz's report is valid. Requesting a GPS check is just a waste of time." However, David didn't back down. He continued resolutely. "If Officer Ruiz really witnessed me driving that car, then the GPS evidence will confirm it. If not, it's just an unsupported testimony." David turned to Judge Jackson and continued, "Your Honor, I am asking for one thing, to check the evidence presented by the prosecution, and we will know whether Officer Ruiz's testimony is credible or not." Silence filled the courtroom as people began to realize that David, a 19-year-old, was not under pressure and was leading the argument in a way they hadn't expected. Surely, this had changed the atmosphere in the room, from initial mocking smiles to an eerie silence, as if everyone was waiting for the next answer. Judge Jackson took a deep breath and turned to Prosecutor Carrington. "Does the prosecution have any issue with verifying Officer Ruiz's GPS logs?" The entire courtroom waited for Carrington's answer, and at that moment, David knew he had made a major shift in how the case was being perceived. At this point, Prosecutor Carrington, despite trying to maintain his confident demeanor, was clearly wavering. He remained silent for a long while, his gaze betraying his tension. Everyone in the courtroom watched his every move, sensing the change in the atmosphere. Finally, Carrington spoke, but his voice clearly revealed some unease. "Your Honor, Officer Ruiz's report is valid. We can't delay the case because of this request." However, David's resolve remained unshaken. He continued with a small smile, not responding to the prosecutor's words, but rather firmly looking at Judge Jackson, requesting, "Your Honor, I am simply asking for the truth. If Officer Ruiz was really at the scene, the GPS data will confirm it. If not, we must reconsider the legality of the entire case." He paid no attention to the prosecutor's irritated look, focusing only on one thing: fairness and transparency in the trial process. Judge Jackson, after some thought, lowered his gavel and turned to Carrington. "I think we need to verify this information. If there is no discrepancy in the report, we will proceed. But if there is anything suspicious, we cannot ignore it." A strange silence enveloped the courtroom. At first, everyone viewed David as an inexperienced young man, but now they had to admit that what he was saying was logical and credible. Prosecutor Carrington could not oppose Judge Jackson's request. He reluctantly nodded, his expression unsatisfied, but with no other choice. "No objections, Your Honor," Carrington was forced to admit. Immediately, the atmosphere in the courtroom shifted completely. People realized that the narrative the prosecutor and legal officers had built was not unassailable. David was not just a defendant. He had presented sharp and convincing arguments, steering the entire trial in a different direction. The tension in the room grew thicker as all eyes turned to David, who had proven that he was not a helpless individual, but someone who understood the legal system and had the ability to fight for justice. In that moment, no one could dismiss David anymore. He had earned respect, not by grand speeches or arrogance, but through his knowledge and decisiveness, qualities that few his age possessed. When Judge Jackson decided to allow the verification of Officer Ruiz's GPS data, the atmosphere in the courtroom became suffocating. Everyone realized that things were shifting. Prosecutor Carrington still tried to maintain his confident exterior, but his gaze lost its certainty. David, standing firm against the pressure, continued to assert his rights. He knew he was now in control of the trial, and all he needed to do was continue exposing the truth. When the GPS data of Officer Ruiz was checked, the result showed what Prosecutor Carrington and the officials could not deny. Officer Ruiz was not present at the scene when the incident occurred. This evidence completely exposed the discrepancies in the officer's report. The courtroom was filled with absolute silence. No one could believe what was happening. David didn't stop there. He continued to press his argument, not allowing the prosecutor's slackness to affect the process. "Your Honor," he said, calmly but decisively, "if Officer Ruiz's testimony is false, then all the evidence from the prosecution should be disregarded. We cannot proceed with a trial based on a false report and assumptions." All eyes were on David now, and respect began to form from his sharp words and irrefutable logic. Finally, Judge Jackson realized that this was no simple case. He had reevaluated every element of the case, from the evidence to the way the prosecutor had been avoiding important issues. An undeniable truth had been revealed, and now everyone in the courtroom understood that David was not just a defendant, but a person standing up for the truth and justice. "With everything presented, I dismiss this case," Judge Jackson finally announced, and the courtroom erupted with astonished sighs. David had won, not only in the trial, but in forcing everyone to reconsider the legal system, especially how those in power can exploit the system to create injustice. As the noise in the courtroom began to settle, David turned back to look at Judge Jackson, not with a sense of triumph, but with a sense of satisfaction for doing what was right. He didn't need to prove he was the smartest or the best, but he had proven that justice would always prevail when one was brave enough to fight for it.